Okay, this is the book that I have so far, and all these other notes that I've left about the book will have to somehow be welded into this main text in one way or another. It might take a totally different shape by the time I'm done. Okay, here it is. It's essentially the history of woke, I would say. Over the past century, a series of intellectual movements, beginning with cultural Marxism, developing through critical theory, and culminating in what is now commonly called woke Marxism, have sought to fundamentally reshape Western society by attacking its traditional norms. Rooted in Marx's explicit hostility toward inherited traditions, which he described as dead weight, these movements gradually shifted their focus away from economics and towards culture, education, sexuality, and language. What began as a critique of class hierarchy evolved, into a broader assault on the family, merit-based hiring and admission policies to universities, freedom of speech, and Enlightenment ideals of objective truth and equal opportunity. These are the things that are under attack. This essay argues that the cumulative effect of this ideological progression has not been liberation but social fragmentation, institutional decay, and widespread harm, perhaps especially to children. Antonio Gramsci marks a crucial turning point in Marxist thought. Observing that capitalism in the West had proven resilient, Gramsci concluded that revolution would not succeed through economics alone. He argued that culture itself, religion, family, education, and shared moral norms, acted as a protective barrier against radical change. His theory of cultural hegemony reframed power as something maintained through institutions rather than force, leading to the strategy later summarized as the long march through the institutions. By gradually replacing traditional ideas from within, schools, universities, media, and civic life, Gramsci laid the foundation for cultural Marxism, a long-term project aimed at eroding Western civilization without open revolt. The Frankfurt School extended this tragedy after confronting an inconvenient reality. Capitalism was delivering rising living standards, political freedoms, and social mobility to working people across the West. Since material deprivation no longer produced revolutionary momentum, Marxism adapted by redefining oppression itself. Critical theory expanded the concept of domination beyond class into culture, psychology, sexuality, race, and identity. Western norms of discipline, delayed gratification, family stability, merit were reinterpreted as instruments of control rather than sources of progress. By cultivating resentment, grievance, and identity based conflict, critical theorists sought to manufacture the social tension that economic success had failed to produce. Herbert Marcuse made this shift explicit and political. In Eros and Civilization and Repressive Tolerance, Marcuse argued that society was too stable to collapse naturally and therefore required deliberate destabilization. He framed work, self-restraint, and I'm distracted a bit. Sorry. He reframed work, self-restraint, and moral limits as forms of repression, while promoting sexual liberation as a tool for undermining authority and social cohesion. His argument that some speech must be suppressed in the name of liberation, so-called repressive tolerance, provided an intellectual rationale for silencing dissent. This logic now appears plainly in modern universities where disfavored views are censored under the banner of harm prevention, equity, or justice. Michel Foucault then carried critical theory beyond critique of norms into a rejection of truth itself. He argued that knowledge, science, and reason are inseparable from power, recasting institutions such as medicine, law, and education as mechanisms of domination rather than progress. This worldview echoed the logic of communist revolutions, most notably Mao's Cultural Revolution, where students were encouraged to attack teachers, traditions, and expertise as oppressive. The result was chaos, mass persecution, and millions of deaths. While developed in academic language, Foucault's ideas legitimized a similar suspicion toward competence, hierarchy, and objective standards. Jacques Derrida radicalized this trajectory by denying the stability of meaning altogether. Through deconstruction, he argued that language cannot reliably refer to reality, and that claims to truth merely conceal power relations. Enlightenment ideals, reason, objectivity, universality, were reframed as masks for domination. Yet the skepticism proved selective. While objective meaning was declared impossible in general, postmodern theory converged on a single moral certainty that Western society is structured by oppressive hierarchies with particular identity groups, white males, designated, with particular identity groups, anybody but white males, designated as perpetual victims and others as inherent oppressors. Deconstruction thus dissolved shared standards while preserving ideological conclusion, replacing argument with accusation. What is now called woke Marxism represents the political application of this intellectual lineage. Gramsci supplied the strategy, the Frankfurt School supplied the grievance framework, Marcuse supplied the justification for silencing opponents, Foucault dissolved truth into power, and Derrida dissolved meaning itself. Class struggle was replaced by identity struggle. Equality of opportunity gave way to forced outcomes. Merit was replaced by grievance. Free inquiry by ideological conformity. Institutions once devoted to education and upward mobility were repurposed as instruments of political conditioning. Nowhere is this more evident than in the treatment of children. Marx and Engels openly argued that education should be removed from parental influence and placed under collective control as early as possible. In its modern form, this impulse appears through early institutional childcare, ideological curricula, and the displacement of family authority by bureaucratic and activist structures. Education shifts from skill building and knowledge transmission to ideological formation, while parents are sidelined as obstacles to progress. The predictable outcome is confusion, emotional instability, and decreased resilience, costs borne disproportionately by the most vulnerable people in society. Children, I would say.